And from his studio in New York, John Lennon talks first about the FBI and their harassment.
My phones were tapped and they were following me around New York in a car for about 3 days. But Watergate hadn't bust. There was no story on it. So when I first started saying it, even to my own lawyer, he was saying, no, you know, these artists are paranoid, and everybody's saying Lennon's a big mouth or he's an egomaniac, so why would they bother with somebody like him? Or why would they bother with Joe Namath, who is the Georgie Best of America, for those who don't know about it? And he's not even been to, you know, it hasn't even been vaguely political, which I was sort of involved in, you know? And they were tapping and following people around. They had these lists of people, you know, that had nothing to do with anything, you know. And I was one of them, and the whole thing really started when it got into Rolling Stone or some magazine that I was going to, Yoko and I were going to the Republican convention, which was going to be in San Diego in 71 or whenever the last election was, or, you know, before the build-up before the elections, you know. And it was going to be in San Diego originally, the Republican convention, and there was big talk amongst the movement, the peace movement, well, all those different people, you know, from Allen Ginsberg to Jerry Rubin, you know, all across the spectrum, about having, you know, an anti-war thing going on there. And the dialogue was at the time, you know, well, amongst the more arty types like Ginsberg and myself and Yoko, who, you know, are still not for violence. I'm still the same. I'm anti-war, you know. About, well, is it going to be Chicago? Because that was, you know, that Chicago thing in 68, for those of you who've forgotten, was hell. You know, people were beaten to death by the cops there. And not to death, actually, I don't think, but, you know, beaten up. And it was really a messy scene, you know. And I was, you know, these people were, as people do now, calling me out for a charity show or some, you know, event or something, you know. And I was seeing all these people, and they were saying, you know, should we go to San Diego and have an anti-war rally? And I was just discussing it with them. Next thing, it's in the papers that John and Yoko are going to lead a vast rally in San Diego, you know, with Jerry Rubin, Allen Ginsberg, listing everybody, right? Then things started happening, you know. Like, you know, now, I lost the case just recently, about 4 months ago, about whether my phone was tapped, because I can't prove it, you know. I just know there's a lot of repairs going on in the cellar. And I know the difference between the phone being normal when I pick it up and when every time I pick it up there's a lot of noises, you know. And as I said before, when I told my lawyer, I said, I think they're tapping my phone. And somebody gave me a number that you call that if you dial it and you get this feedback sound, it's supposed to say your phone is tapped, you know. And I was paranoid at the time, you know, who wouldn't be, you know. And because suddenly I realized this was serious, you know. They were coming for me one way or the other, you know. I mean, they were harassing me. And I'd open the door and there'd be guys standing on the other side of the street. I'd get in the car and they'd be following me in a car and not hiding, you see. That's why I got a bit paranoid as well. They wanted me to see I was being followed, you know. So I went on a show called Dick Cavett Show here, which is like a talk show, you know. And I said it that night. I said, I was very nervous about saying it, because, you know. But I'd learned something from Dick Gregory, which he says, because they've been doing him for years. I mean, they've been following him and tapping him, and they never leave him alone. He's on permanent display. He said the best way is to say it out, you know. Say it out. And everybody knows if anything happens to you, what happened to you. You know, I'm not saying they had any other plans other than just keeping the tabs on me, you know, to see what I was up to, who I was seeing. I was seeing people like Bobby Seale, all sorts of people like that. And I said it on the air, on the TV, and they went away the next day. There was nobody there. So even now, as I talk about it, I begin to think, was I dreaming? Was I dreaming, you know? But if you also read in that Rolling Stone article, not only was I saying these things, oh, and by the way, my lawyer, who was as square as the next lawyer, started to agree because he found that his phones were being tapped, and he doesn't know how to prove it either. He says the things going on my phone, you know, it's happening to me, and he's straight, you know. He's just a straight lawyer.
This is an evening with John Lennon, and I asked John if he thought that there'd be any change now that there was someone new sitting in the White House.
Who's sitting in the White House, may I ask? It's the year of our Ford, as they say. Things haven't changed for me because I don't know or really care anymore if my phone's being tapped or not, you know? And nobody's following me around because, everywhere I go is pretty open, you know? So I don't really care about that anymore. It just gave me a fright at one time. And so far the administration has changed heads, but it's still the same administration, actually. It's a political decision, no matter what the Immigration Department keep insisting on, and everybody knows it. And it's a decision that might be hard for them, because maybe guys that were in power, even though it's the same party in power, you know, once the bureaucracy starts something, it's pretty hard to unwind that red tape. It just keeps churning on out. And who's going to make the decision? And what is Lennon going to do if they suddenly say, okay, people are going to, is Lennon going to make a noise, or is some congressman going to stand up and say, well, what were you doing with him in the first place? If there's time still to bother with rock stars, which is what I am, you know. And by the way, I'm not the only rock star that's, harassed, but nobody else tried to stay here, and nobody else hung out with them baddies, you know, like I did, because, you know, maybe I'm dumb, but I was interested. They were interested in people, and I wanted to hear what they had to say about everything. You know, the Rubins and the Hoffmans and the Seals and all the people that were saying things. I wanted to know what they're saying. You know, tell me. I don't want to read no book on them. You come and tell me what you think about it. But people like Mick Jagger, Paul, George, they all have trouble getting in and out of the country. Mick had to, you know, vanish up his own manhole to get Keith and the rest of them into tour even. I mean, he did a lot of behind-the-scenes work just to get them to be allowed in.
Great. You're listening to a repeat of an interview that we broadcast some time ago, recorded in New York with John Lennon. More in just a minute. Hello, in stereo on 95.8. This is Capital. And glowing mono on 194. An evening with John Lennon. When I was in New York, I asked John what the latest news was on that elusive green card.
The latest is, I'm appealing. It's just about there. I don't know. You know, it goes on, and I'm in court. I don't go, actually. The lawyer goes, and then he sends me a note saying this happened or this didn't happen. It's good, it's bad. There's hope, there isn't hope. You know, I try and be positive about it, and I think I'm going to get it this year, you know. But I've got no rational reason to say that, except for I think I'm going to get it.
I then asked John what his life in New York was like.
It's not dissimilar to my life in England, actually. You know, because my life, or one's life, anybody's life, revolves around your own personal family or friends that you either live with or hang around with, the business or work that you do, right? So my life for the last 10 years, say, has been, or since I've been, quotes, famous, unquote, it's changed a lot, but basically it's a bedroom, a studio, a TV, a night out, back home, you know? And apart from that they talk American version of English on the TV, and it goes on a bit longer in places like New York, you know, it goes on all night, say, there's not that much vast difference. It's not a culture shock. You know, I imagine that this place is like London must have been in Victorian days when Britain was at the height of its power, or, you know, on the decline, or whatever the peak was, you know, round about those few decades, or maybe 20, 30, 50 years, I don't know how long those things last. When, you know, the American Empire is now what the British Empire used to be. And whenever the French had it, you know, they had their empire. Paris was cooking, as they call it. And America has the empire of the world, even though it seems to be sort of molding off a bit, you know, and they're losing their empire, even though they don't call it an empire, a bit. It's still, you know, it still has that quality about it. And although Washington's called the capital, a lot of the action is in New York, you know, because that's where the money people are. And that's where, it's an old place, you know, and it was built up, right? So it's a big, big city in that respect. Well, it's not physically big, it's big in the matter of power and the amount of people here. And I reckon it must have been like this in between Victorian days in London when everybody wanted to be there. Or even when that Bloomsbury group of Virginia Woolf and all those people were writing their books and their poetry in England in the 20s or something like that. It's where a lot of people go to, you know, and that's why I became enamored of it and stayed here. And it is a difference like chalk and cheese in a way, but I just sort of felt at home here. As soon as I relaxed and got over the fact that I wasn't, you know, in England and that I was living somewhere else, I just, you know, fortunately or unfortunately, they speak English, so I just fitted in, and doesn't feel like an American, because when you try and pinpoint down what an American is, if you come over here, it's pretty hard to find one, because they're all Italian Americans, or Irish Americans, or African Americans, Afro-Americans. You know, everybody's from somewhere else, you know. You know, even though they've been here, so the country's having its birthday of 200 years, they've been here longer than that. You know, English were here in 1500 something. So it's pretty hard to find out what an American is. It's just a bunch of people from everywhere else who came over here. So I just feel quite at home here. Yeah, I'm back with Yoko, and it's rather nice. I feel a little bit sane again. I had a bit, I mean, you know, it's a bit traumatic when something happens to you, like, you know, like I said, our failure was a separation, you know, and it was a tough year. Yeah, I mean, when it's all right wondering what it's like on the other side, or the grass is greener, but when you get there, it's more grass. You know, and I don't know whether I'll ever learn that lesson about life. That's one of the lessons of life, I guess, you know, about always thinking, well, what's it like to stand on your head and do it? Right? Or what's it like to eat that food or something, you know?
Hello, this is An Evening with John Lennon, and here John once again talks about Yoko.
We had a mutual separation. I mean, obviously for press and radio and all the media, they always have to have some handle to put on it, you know? So I came back. I was allowed back, in actual fact, you know? And we had a mutual separation and a mutual getting back together, you know? She ain't no chick that you say, okay, I'll see you Friday, I'm coming back Monday, you know? I mean, you're dealing with a fully aware human being, and there's no treating her like your chick, you know? The rock and roll thing, yeah. That was part of 74, even though it started in 73. I put that within No More 74, you know? I don't want to go through that again. My idea was I'd just finished Mind Games, you know, and I thought, what can I do for fun? You know, it's all this sweat and thinking and writing your songs and getting involved and, you know, searching your soul for the meaning of life, right? Or trying to write a song, you could call it, in other words. I thought, what, you know, let's have some fun, man. Let somebody else be the producer completely. You know, I'd never given control of anything to anybody before, except for when we were early days with, you know, lucky to get in the studio kind of thing, but you know, I hadn't left control of it. I thought, I'll just sing old rock and have fun and not be the producer, just be a sort of singer, and maybe Phil will be the best who knows, because Phil is the least you could call it is eccentric, you know, and that's coming from somebody who's balmy, so you can imagine what it was like in there. And, you know, somehow or other he had the tapes. And we'd cut about 7 or 8 tracks, you know, so I was tapeless and jobless, you know. I mean, the thing that started out to be fun had ended up as funny. So I hung around L.A. just getting bombed out my head, you know, and waking up in the papers, you know. And so I turned around to Harry Nielsen and said, look, instead of lying here on the floor, as Ringo's song No, No, No says, let's do something. So we started to do his album, and then I gradually pulled myself together in his album, came back to New York, started Walls and Bridges, and I got the tapes 2 days before I went in to do Walls and Bridges. Couldn't stand to listen to them, because I thought, I don't want to even remember what was going on in L.A., never mind listen to tapes. Did Walls and Bridges, put that out, and decided, now I'll take a look at these tapes. Only about 4 of them I could really save. In my opinion, I don't know what Phil has to say about it, but in my opinion, only 4 of them I could use. And when 28 guys are out of tune, you know, it's pretty hard to mix them down. because there was 28 playing live on the fill sessions. You know, it was a fantastic experience in a way. So I decided, well, look, I either just throw this away. I was thinking, what can I do? Make an EP out of it? Just put it on TV and buy this EP special? I didn't know what to do with it. And I thought, well, the best thing to do is finish it off. You know, make enough tracks to have an album, and then decide what to do with it. You know? So I did it. I cut another 10 in about 5 days, you know, and really had more fun. In fact, I just took it very relaxed. Thought, well, if it works, it works. Stuck them all together, and then thought, now what do I do with it? You know, they've all been waiting for this Phil Spector, John Lennon thing, so whatever they expecting is not going to be good enough. So at one point, I needed to ask me, I won't put it out. And then I got away from it a bit, and then played it to people who hadn't been involved and weren't expecting heaven. And they said, hey, it's all right. And I said, it's all right, is it? Oh, it's all right. Oh, it's not bad at all. I quite like some of it myself. Okay, let's put it out. And it went out, and that's the story of that one. The story on Apple Folding, or whatever they call it, was the fact that the Beatles finally signed a lot of pieces of paper to deal with the past, mainly, and part of the future. And it actually was more to do with, for instance, even though we were making separate records, you know, completely, the money was all going into one pot. You know, so I mean, we'd have to wait for it to go into this pot and then come out, and there'd be so much hassle just to get paid for what you do. So we signed this agreement saying the money would come direct to us, you know. So if Paul sold 20 million Band on the Runs and I only sold 10 million, you know, Imagines or something, I wouldn't be copying his money and vice versa, you know. So that's what we wanted, you know, just, you know, give me what I earn, you know. We were sick of being in a pot, you know. And also it sort of laid the groundwork for future dealings with Beatle business, because even though the Beatles aren't making any new records, the records still make quite a lot of money, you know, and the money still is generated in larger amounts than people would imagine. Imagine there's no heaven.